After 8 long years of working on Gregory's community development projects, I had finally done it. I turned them into a $12 million success story. I poured everything I had into the Riverside Commercial District project, breathing life into a vision that once seemed impossible to achieve. Then everything changed during a family meeting that was supposed to be a celebration. It was the anniversary of my mother's passing, and we had just finished dinner beneath her framed photograph in the living room. Gregory smiled at me, calm and proud. Then he placed his hand on Marcus's shoulder and said the words that hit me like a freight train: "Marcus will take over the project leadership now." I felt my stomach drop, but I kept my face steady. Years of practice had taught me how to hide the storm inside. I smiled back, pretending those words hadn't just shattered 8 years of my life's work. The room felt heavy with unspoken tension, the soft tick of the grandfather clock filling the silence. It was supposed to be a night of remembrance for my mother and celebration of what we had built, for what I had built. But suddenly, I was invisible. I grew up watching Gregory struggle to establish his foothold in regional development, a modest investment portfolio that barely generated steady returns in the early days. He worked long hours, missed family gatherings, and fought for every project approval. When I was 24, fresh out of graduate school with my urban planning degree, I had to fight just to be allowed to help. But once I stepped in, I transformed everything. I took that small collection of scattered investments and turned it into a comprehensive community development strategy. I secured major partnerships, implemented sustainable planning principles, and restructured our approach from scattered efforts to focused impact. And yet, none of it mattered. My stepbrother Marcus, who had never shown any real interest in community development, was now taking over. He had spent the last 7 years bouncing between failed real estate ventures, always chasing quick profits and high-risk investments. Community building didn't interest him. Creating something lasting never interested him. But control did. As Gregory's words sank in, Marcus lowered his gaze, pretending to be humble. But I knew better. He had been waiting for this moment. He had played his role well, the devoted son, finally ready to carry the family legacy. And Gregory, despite his promises to my mother, saw no flaw in giving the project leadership to his biological son. After all, in his eyes, a stepdaughter's contribution was temporary. No matter how hard I worked, I was never the true heir, just someone filling a role until the rightful successor was ready. But what they didn't realize was that I hadn't just developed a project. I had built my foundation within it. While they were stuck in their traditional thinking, I had quietly secured every crucial element, every community partnership, every zoning approval, every development right. My vision was embedded in all of it. And tomorrow morning, they would see exactly what that meant. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept replaying every late evening at community meetings, every tough negotiation, every sacrifice I had made. But one thing was clear: this wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning. I gave everything to the Riverside project, the late nights, the missed birthdays, the friendships and relationships that couldn't survive the weight of my dedication. It all went into building this community vision. Every part of my life was shaped around it. And now they expected me to just step aside. They had underestimated me. By 4 a.m., I was in my home study, the glow of my laptop lighting up the room. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I pulled up property deeds, development contracts, zoning agreements, everything I had quietly secured over the years. No one knew this project better than I did. Not Gregory, and certainly not Marcus. Marcus thought this would be a smooth transition, that by next week, his name would be on the project director's paperwork and his authority would be official. But while Gregory was busy attending community fundraisers and Marcus was pretending to care about sustainable development, I was working behind the scenes on something much more important: legal ownership. At 9 a.m., I walked into my home study, just like I had every morning for the last 8 years when working from home. The same oak bookshelves, the same framed photos of completed projects on the walls. But today felt different. Today, this wasn't just my workspace, it was a battlefield. The house was quiet, too quiet. Gregory and Marcus had arrived early, their voices drifting from the kitchen where they were having coffee. I could hear Marcus's confident laughter, the sound of someone who believed victory was already his. Gregory's deeper voice responded with what sounded like approval. I didn't hurry. I walked steadily down the hallway, my footsteps soft on the hardwood floor. I had learned a long time ago, never let them see you rattled. I entered the living room where my mother's photograph watched over us, and quietly took my seat at the dining table. I had exactly 10 minutes before they joined me, expecting to finalize their plans, Gregory as the project overseer once again, and Marcus as the chosen successor. 10 minutes before their assumptions crumbled. I opened my laptop, took a steady breath, and pulled up the files. The screen displayed confidential documents, property records they'd never bothered to examine, agreements they thought were routine paperwork. But they weren't routine at all. One folder sat prominently on my desktop, Property Rights and Development Authority. I opened it and waited. At exactly 9:10 a.m., they walked in together. Gregory entered first, composed and authoritative. Behind him, Marcus followed, dressed in his best button-down shirt, looking pleased like someone about to receive an inheritance. His confidence seemed genuine, while Gregory's carried the weight of years of community leadership. Vivian, Gregory said, his tone gentle but firm, I trust you understand what we discussed last night about the leadership transition. Transition, I repeated, settling back in my chair. Interesting choice of word. Yes, I understand your intentions. Good, he said with a slight nod, as if everything was proceeding as planned. Marcus will be taking over as project director. We'll need you to help with the handover, make sure he understands all the community relationships before you step back to an advisory role. I tilted my head slightly. Step back? His expression tightened. He didn't like being questioned. He wasn't accustomed to it. Vivian, he said, his voice cooler now, this isn't up for discussion. The decision has been made. I smiled slowly, calm and knowing. I understand that, Gregory. The thing is, you don't have the authority to make that decision. Marcus scoffed, shaking his head. Vivian, come on. Don't turn this into a conflict. We're trying to handle this respectfully. I didn't respond to him. Instead, I turned my laptop screen toward them. A document appeared, clear and official, Property Ownership and Development Rights Agreement. The same document neither of them had ever examined closely. The same one that would completely upend their assumptions. I've been reviewing the property ownership documents tied to this project, signed back on March 15, 2018. The signatories were Vivian Miller, that's my maiden name, Gregory Hoffman, and Marcus Hoffman. As I looked at Gregory, I noticed his face grow pale. I turned to Marcus. Do you even know what this document covers? I asked. He crossed his arms and shifted uncomfortably. Property agreements, he guessed. I nodded. Yes. And do you know what it says? I pointed to a specific clause. This was created when the project boundaries were established. It clearly states that any major development decisions must be approved by all majority landowners. I met Gregory's eyes directly. And Gregory, I own 85% of the development property. The room fell silent. Gregory's face grew stern. That's not possible. Marcus muttered and leaned forward to get a better look. Oh, it's very possible, I replied calmly. While you were busy managing your investment portfolio and Marcus was chasing real estate deals, I was doing something else. I was securing the foundation. I leaned forward slightly. Remember when you needed my mother's inheritance for the initial land purchase in 2018? She left me 45% of the original property. Then in 2020, when you needed additional funding for zoning approvals, you transferred another 25% to me as collateral. You never reclaimed it. Add that to the 15% I purchased independently over the years, and here we are. Gregory clenched his jaw. Marcus's face turned ashen with shock. You're lying, he snapped. Without a word, I handed him a second document. This is the current property registry filing with the county. Feel free to verify it. Marcus grabbed the paper, scanning it frantically. His face lost all color. You can't do this, he stammered. Dad, tell her she can't do this. But Gregory said nothing. He knew I hadn't violated any agreements. I had simply been more strategic. I stood up slowly. I'm not removing you from the project, Marcus, I said. I wouldn't want to leave you without any involvement. But from now on, you'll work under my direction. You'll follow my leadership. Otherwise, I gestured toward the door, you're welcome to pursue other opportunities. Marcus looked at Gregory, silently pleading for support. But for the first time in his life, Gregory had no solution to offer. Because this wasn't his project anymore. It was mine. The silence in the living room was heavy. Marcus still clutched the document, his knuckles white. Gregory stood beside him, his expression unreadable, but I knew he was calculating, searching for an alternative. There wasn't one. I had prepared for this moment, not out of malice, but because I had learned that when control is involved, family loyalty is never guaranteed. For the first time ever, Gregory looked at me as if I was a stranger. Maybe he never really understood who I was. So that's it? Marcus finally said, his voice full of resentment. You're just taking everything? I let out a quiet laugh. Taking everything? I stepped closer. Marcus, I built this project. Every partnership, every approval, every successful phase, I was the one making it work while you were losing money on risky investments. I kept this vision alive. So no, I'm not taking anything. I'm protecting what's already mine. Marcus's face flushed with anger, but he had no response. And worse, he knew I was right. So did Gregory. For years, Gregory believed that blood family was more important than capability, that his son would inherit what I had developed. He was wrong. And now he was facing the reality. You're making a mistake, Vivian, he said finally, his voice controlled but strained. Family should support each other. Do you want to destroy these relationships? I met his gaze without wavering. Gregory, I said quietly, you damaged this relationship the day you made decisions about my work without consulting me. His jaw tensed. Community development is bigger than one person. We can find a solution that benefits everyone. I tilted my head slightly, as if considering. I agree. That's why I'm offering you both options. I turned to Marcus first. You can remain involved in the project, I said, my tone calm and professional. You won't be the director. You'll serve as a consultant. You'll have a decent fee but limited decision-making power. And you will work under my supervision. Marcus tensed but said nothing. The message was clear, the authority had shifted and it wasn't reversing. But I continued. Or you can step away, I said calmly. I'll compensate you fairly for your time invested. Take that experience, find a new opportunity, and focus your energy somewhere else. Gregory shook his head. You're acting like you control everything. I gave him a small, knowing smile. That's because I do. A heavy silence followed. I let it linger. I wanted them to absorb that reality, to understand what it felt like to have no leverage, to recognize the situation had changed and they weren't setting the terms anymore. Finally, Gregory exhaled and shook his head, disbelief clear on his face. I never thought you'd do this, he said quietly. Not to your own family. His words stung more than I expected. Not to your own family. I wanted to tell him that he was the one who started this, that he had chosen to sideline me, treat me like temporary help until the real heir was ready. But I didn't say it, because in the end, it didn't matter. What mattered was that I wasn't going to let them take what I had built. Not now, not ever. Marcus stormed out first. Good riddance. I knew exactly what his next move would be. He'd go to our extended family, to old neighborhood friends and community contacts, spinning the story to paint himself as the victim of family betrayal. Let him. I wasn't here to win their sympathy. I was here to protect my work. Gregory stayed a moment longer, almost as if he expected me to reconsider. I didn't. And when it was clear I wouldn't, he gave a slow nod. "You've changed," he said quietly. I met his gaze. "No, Gregory. I just finally stopped pretending." Then he left too. I exhaled, sinking back into my chair. I should have felt triumphant. I had fought for my position, and I had won. But instead, I felt something else, a quiet ache. A part of me, no matter how small, had always wanted his acceptance. I had spent years proving myself, hoping that one day he'd truly see me as family. But the truth was, he never had. And now he had no choice. He didn't see a stepdaughter anymore. He saw the real me, the leader of the Riverside project. I turned back to my laptop, my focus sharpening. I had spent 8 years building this vision. Now I would spend the next 8 making it unshakable. Gregory and Marcus had tried to take everything from me. In the end, they lost their control instead. For the first time in over a decade, my house was quiet. No calls from Gregory, no passive-aggressive texts from Marcus. Just silence. But silence didn't mean peace. It meant preparation for battle. I knew neither of them would accept this easily. Gregory wouldn't step back quietly. Marcus would fight, convinced that this project was his by family right. I wasn't naive enough to think this was over. It had only just begun. By the next morning, the shift in atmosphere was obvious. Community leaders who had been friendly last week now seemed distant. Local business owners hesitated when they spoke to me. I could sense the whispers. I knew what was happening. Gregory and Marcus were already working their network, old friends, city council members, longtime community partners, spreading doubt, reshaping the narrative. They were painting me as calculating, ungrateful, and disloyal. Marcus especially had embraced the role of the wronged stepson. I could picture it now, him sitting in the local coffee shop, voice heavy with hurt, telling anyone who'd listen how his stepsister had stolen the family project from him. And Gregory? He didn't need to say much. Just a tired sigh, a disappointed shake of the head, a gentle comment like I only ever wanted what was best for both my children. It was subtle. It was strategic. And it was dangerous. Because if they managed to turn enough people against me, especially the key community stakeholders, they could make my leadership impossible. Maybe not legally, but they could make my work a constant struggle. I wasn't going to let that happen. That afternoon, I called an emergency meeting with the core project team. When I walked into the community center conference room, the tension was immediate. Half the room avoided eye contact. The other half watched me too intently, waiting for a misstep. I walked to the head of the table, my usual seat, and I sat down. "Let's not waste time," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I know there have been conversations happening privately, over coffee and phone calls." I looked around the room, letting my gaze rest on each face for a moment longer than was comfortable, enough to make them shift in their seats. I'm not here to silence concerns, but I am here to lead. And if anyone questions my vision, my leadership, or my right to sit in this chair, speak now or step away. I could feel the unease in the room. Some people were wondering if I had what it takes to continue leading this project. A few shifted uncomfortably. No one said a word. I tapped my fingers lightly on the wooden table in front of me. "Let's address that directly," I said. I opened my laptop and turned the screen toward them, displaying a presentation, charts, timelines, completion metrics. In the last 4 years, I've taken this project from a small neighborhood initiative to a $12 million community success story. Property values are up 340%. We've brought in 15 new businesses. This didn't happen by accident. I looked toward Diane, our operations coordinator. "Diane, is there a single performance indicator suggesting this project is struggling under my leadership?" Diane hesitated, then shook her head. "No. In fact, we're ahead of schedule and under budget for the next phase." I nodded once. So let's be honest about what's happening here. I leaned forward slightly, my voice steady. Gregory and Marcus aren't concerned because this project is failing. They're concerned because it's succeeding without their direct control. They expected me to step aside and hand Marcus the leadership, regardless of his track record, regardless of the results. The room was quiet until I revealed the next truth. I also know that some of you have been contacted in the last 48 hours. Suggestions were made, promises offered, pressure applied to question my leadership. I let that sink in. If anyone wants to acknowledge those conversations now, this is your opportunity. More shifting, uncomfortable glances. Then one of the senior team members finally spoke. I received a call, she said, clearing her throat, from Gregory. He said he was considering restructuring the project leadership. I nodded. And did he suggest anything in return for your support? The team member paused, then slowly nodded. Yes. There it is, I said, standing. Let's not pretend otherwise. Gregory initiated this project, and I respect that. But I developed it beyond what he ever envisioned. I will not let him manipulate it from the sidelines. I let my voice grow firm, decisive. If he wants a confrontation, he'll have one. I closed my laptop, pausing to meet the eyes of every team member in the room. If anyone here believes Gregory and Marcus should be in control, now is the time to say it. No one moved. No one spoke. Good, I said. And I walked out, head high. This wasn't just about protecting what I'd built. It was about making sure they knew they'd never undermine me again. That night, I made a call. Not to the team, not to a lawyer, but to the local newspaper. By morning, the local newspaper carried the headline, "Leadership Dispute in Riverside Project, Vivian Miller Takes Control Amid Family Tensions." I had made my move. Now I was waiting for theirs. By the next morning, my phone exploded, calls, texts, and emails from community leaders, local business owners, and city council members. Some were supportive, others were cautious, but most of them asked the same thing: what's really happening? I didn't respond immediately. I knew the game Gregory was playing. He had spent decades building his reputation in this community. He understood that in local politics, relationships could be just as powerful as facts. If he couldn't beat me through legal channels, he'd try to isolate me through social pressure. And sure enough, by noon, the counterattack arrived, a carefully worded statement circulated through the community network. The Riverside Project has always been a collaborative family effort. We are disappointed by recent developments but remain committed to the community values that built this initiative. Leadership transitions can be challenging, and we hope for a peaceful resolution moving forward. It was subtle, but I knew exactly what it was meant to convey. Vivian is ungrateful. Vivian is divisive. Vivian isn't a team player. I wasn't surprised, but I was angry. I sat in my study, watching the local news as commentators discussed the story. Is Vivian Miller too aggressive in her approach? Will her leadership style harm community relations? Is she facing a reputation crisis she can't overcome? They talked like I wasn't listening, like I wasn't already planning my response. But I was. If Gregory and Marcus wanted a public battle, I was prepared to give them one. I didn't release a statement. I didn't call a community meeting. Instead, I made one quiet phone call to a friend who worked for the regional business journal. I have something for you, I said, but you'll need to act quickly. An hour later, I sent over everything: documents, emails, financial records, and project reports. It was all evidence of the financial mismanagement the Riverside Project had been covering for years, mistakes made under Gregory's oversight. I had spent the last decade fixing them quietly. Within 48 hours, the story went live: Behind the Success of Riverside, How One Woman Saved a Failing Development. The article was thorough. It exposed the hidden budget overruns, praised my management for correcting them, and made one thing clear: I was the reason this project was thriving. Not Gregory. Not Marcus. Me. And just like that, the narrative shifted. The community leaders stopped questioning. Local businesses stopped hesitating. And Gregory? He had nowhere left to retreat. 3 days later, he finally called. I let the phone ring 4 times before I answered. Vivian, he said, his voice strained, we need to talk. I leaned back in my chair. Do we? There was silence, then a sigh. You didn't have to do that. I gave a quiet laugh. Neither did you. This project was supposed to be a legacy, he said. For the family. For both of you. I felt a small, sharp ache in my chest. A part of me had once wanted that too. But not anymore. Gregory, I said quietly, if you wanted me to protect the legacy, you should have trusted me with it. Instead, you tried to take it from me. Another long silence followed. Then he asked, slowly, almost reluctantly, what happens now? I took a breath. Now? I make sure you never get the chance to undermine this project again. The conflict was over. Gregory had lost. Marcus had disappeared. And I had won. But as I sat in my study, looking out over the neighborhood where I'd built my vision, there was no triumph in how I felt. No excitement, no celebration. Just a quiet emptiness. I had spent 8 years fighting for the Riverside project, developing it, protecting it, transforming it. And now it was truly mine. But the cost? That was heavier than I expected. Because somewhere along the way, I had lost something else, my family. The next day, I walked into the community center like it was any other morning. But everything had changed. The whispers had stopped. The doubts had faded. People no longer looked at me as just the project coordinator. I was Vivian Miller, the woman who had taken control, who had outmaneuvered her own stepfamily and emerged victorious. Some respected me for it. Some feared me. And some? They waited quietly for me to stumble. I let them wait. At noon, Gregory and I met one last time in the community center conference room. He looked tired, older, worn down. It was like the full weight of everything that had happened had finally settled on him. I waited for him to speak. When he finally did, his voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. I'm stepping back, he said. Effective immediately. I didn't react. I had expected this. I'll transfer my remaining property interests, he continued. I'll keep a small advisory role if you'll have me, but I won't be involved in daily operations anymore. I studied him closely. And Marcus? His jaw tightened. He's gone. Took the settlement. He won't be back. I had known it would end this way. Marcus had never been strong enough to face real consequences. Once he saw he'd lost, he did what he always did, he ran. Still, hearing it said aloud made something inside me shift. It wasn't regret. It wasn't guilt. It was just closure. I nodded. Understood. Gregory sighed and rubbed his temples like he had a headache. Then, after a long pause, he looked at me and said something I never expected. I underestimated you. It wasn't an apology, but it was acknowledgement. It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest thing I would ever get. And strangely, I realized I didn't need it anymore. A month later, the Riverside project looked completely different. The team members who had backed Gregory and Marcus? Gone. The advisors who had once questioned my leadership? Replaced. The project had always succeeded under me, but now it was fully mine. And with that control came a new direction. I introduced changes Gregory had always resisted. I modernized approaches he had called unnecessary. I expanded into areas he had been too cautious to explore. I wasn't just leading, I was transforming. Within 8 months, project success soared. Within a year, we completed the $15 million expansion phase. And for the first time, I wasn't fighting to prove I belonged. I was building something no one could ever take from me again. 1 year after it all ended, Gregory and I met for dinner. It was the first time we had spoken since he stepped back. He looked different, calmer. Not defeated, just at peace. I read about the latest community partnership you secured, he said over his coffee. Impressive work. I smiled slightly. I know. A hint of a smile crossed his face. There was no tension between us anymore. No more power struggle. No more conflict. Just the quiet understanding between us. He had tried to sideline me, and I had proved him wrong. He raised his cup. To the Riverside project. This time, when I touched my cup to his, there was no anger, no bitterness. Just acceptance. Because I had already won, and I didn't need his approval to know it. Now, as I sit in my study, looking out over the neighborhood where I built my vision, I reflect on what this journey has taught me. Sometimes family isn't your support, they're your obstacle. That loyalty is precious but never guaranteed. That authority isn't given, it's earned, claimed, protected. And most of all, that the best way to prove your worth isn't through their recognition. It's by creating something so strong, so undeniable, that they can never dismiss you again. I have no regrets. The Riverside project is mine now. And I'll make sure no one ever forgets.